Welcome to Accessing the Akashic Records, episode 11, Deeper into the Densities and Dimensions, Spiritual Division of Harvest, Ascension and Rapture. Hope you like my new way of going into the videos. I'm just going straight into it rather than doing my little sign-on bit. Tell me what you think. I do like doing the sign-on bit, but I just wanted to try this out and see what people think. So let me know. Alright, so since my previous episode on densities and dimensions, I covered the basics of our octave from 1st to 7th, but now I'm going to go deeper into all of it and focus on the 3D realm in particular as it relates to us and the collective consciousness or Gaian consciousness and its evolution through the process of consciousness evolution. And how the spiritual division of positive and negative works in regards to what's called the harvest in the Law of One and the Abrahamic faith, which also use rapture as one of their ways to describe it also, but ascension is also another word that's used, tends to be used in the more New Age related prophecies, but it's also seen in the older material also. Anyway, so here on your screen now you can see a great new graphic that helps explain the densities and dimensions, specifically as told by the Law of One's philosophical teachings. Now, it's also touched on in older material, such as Buddhist and Hindu in particular. They talk about the seven, as well as Abrahamic faiths talk of seven heavens and things like that. So these seven densities and dimensions are talked about, but not in great detail, and the reason being is probably because over time it's like Chinese whispers. Material from the source tends to degrade or distort from its original form. People will add their own interpretations, or because people get told one thing and because of what they know, they kind of try and relate it to that, and therefore these translations break down and add in all these other new concepts and ideas into the mix, and kind of tends to break down away from the true form of what it was trying to tell. That's all religion really is, in my opinion anyway. Now, the reason I do love the Law of One's explanation, and because I put so much credence to it, like it is so comprehensive, so I guess less distorted, is a good explanation using the Law of One terminology, because it's coming straight from the 6th density into our 3D realm. The only thing is that's degrading it is the fact that it needs to go into words. It's not straight concepts into our consciousness, into our minds. So that's the only way it could be more pure, less distorted, is that Ra, as the being that's channeling or talking, channeling this information through to the three people who authored the Law of One, co-authored with Ra. So there's not much distortion, except for the lack of being able to express things in the, psychic way. That's the only thing. I hope that makes sense. Kind of waffled on a bit there, but hopefully you can understand what I'm trying to convey. Okay, so I'm just going to recap here through using this graphic with a little more explanation as to some of the concepts and then I'm going to go deeper into the concepts of the whole process and how it relates to the Earth's Gaian consciousness and the choice and rapture, ascension, harvest, that concept, and also, yeah, going to negative entities and their control over us and all that kind of horrible stuff. But I'll just touch on all that. So we got a lot to cover, so I'll crack on and stop waffling on. So up here we got the cosmology, so time, space, and space-time. I did cover those already, but the graphic does help a lot. We got densities, so these are all the densities and dimensions. Densities, as I said, does pertain more to the vehicle, the body, whereas dimensions pertains to the environment. So the actual dimension, the plane of existence that entity is inhabiting, with a body of density, such as third density body that we have currently, and we exist in the third dimension. Now, as I mentioned, bodies, there's bodies for each density and dimension. Those are the densities. Infinite, yeah, so we're in an infinite holographic universe. I've already covered the holographic universe in an episode, so that concept I expanded upon quite greatly there in that episode. If you haven't watched it, please do, because it explains how this reality, the concept of Maya, how it's illusory reality and how it's made up through fractals and holographic, how our cells atoms are essentially black holes as such, and that's where everything comes through from, these spiritual dimensions, through each and every atom being created from microsecond to microsecond, beyond our comprehension, I know, but just take it on board, try and process it as you can. Don't try and don't try and confuse yourself too much if it doesn't make sense. But put it aside if it doesn't, drop whatever doesn't resonate with you. So yeah, there's this octave, 1 through to 7, is the one we currently reside in, specifically the third density or dimension, density and dimension I should say, but there's an octave below, an octave above 1 through to 7, and it's infinite above and below, and it's also infinite within, so there's sub-octaves, and I've explained that already, I won't go into that anymore. It'll make sense if you've seen the first episode, but let's talk about the cosmology side. So here in Earth's third density, we experience space as up, down, left and right, and time as linear, so a straight line. Now, the time space, they experience time as up, down, left and right, and space is stationary or linear. Now, that there's a specific reason why they're placed there, because all these lower densities are in space-time, whereas time-space exists partially in fourth, but totally for fifth and sixth and above. So the physical realms experience the space-time. So, as I've mentioned already, first density is earth, water, fire, air, elements, rocks, things like that. That's 1.8 billion years for the earth consciousness to go through, or any consciousness, any planet. Second density, so yeah, that's the density of consciousness, I might add. Second density is the density of awareness, 4.6 billion years. consists of plants and animals. Third density is the density of choice, 77,000 years, so the shortest period, and that's approximate. Don't get too tied up on the... I'll explain cycles of time and all that in the next episode. I'm covering that, cycles of time and consciousness. And the 3D is ensouled humans. So as the Earth goes through that level of consciousness, it's doing so through not only the first and second dimensions, but also in the 3D ensouled human beings, which is us. So we are part of one larger consciousness. Then comes, I'll explain the Earth inner realms, inner planes. So these are like the etheric realms, where you'll get people who've passed on, who are either waiting for ascension into fourth density, the fourth dimension, or you may have people who are not ready, those who are waiting for the next planet to be ready for incarnation of third density, so they can repeat the process, because they haven't quite gone either 51% service to other or 95% service to self. So that's what creates that split, and that's how you progress. If not, you continue on another planet that's set up for third density, third dimension incarnations, to try and make that process, make that choice, I should say. Also in the inner planes you'll get things like ghosts, those kind of beings that haven't been able to let go of things within this life, so they may be stuck in kind of a loop, a limbo of sorts, where they refuse to let go. Maybe something horrible happened in their incarnation and they can't quite get over it, and that's quite often. You'll get haunted houses and things like that, these beings that are stuck and kind of recreating their life and trying to live it forever. However, it's just them perpetually stuck in this realm. Of course, people do see them and they do somewhat interact with the beings that are us third density incarnated beings that are here. We do see them occasionally. They do come in through heightened energy and moving things, all kinds of phenomena. But that's what those beings are, and that they're just somewhat lost and need help to pass over. And quite often there is either mediums in this realm who do help work with those kind of entities, but there's also guides and beings in those etheric realms that come and help. Suicide's also another one where beings can get stuck in there in this perpetual kind of limbo, and that's where the concept of this limbo comes from. It does exist, but it's not forever. Beings do get out of it. Okay, so the split, the choice. So as I mentioned, 51% service to other will get you in, or more or greater, will get you into the ascension process for fourth density, which is the density of love. And it's the same for service to self, provided 95% or higher service to self. Now, why do they have love as their density? You would think they're the opposite of love. They're fear. However, yes, they use fear and thrive on fear. However, they have love of self and love of their own race or species. So it's somewhat oxymoronic, because they do need each other to control others and to further their agenda. So that's oxymoronic in itself, that they do need others, they rely on other forms of themselves, but it's still a necessary path for the greater scheme of things, which will become evident as I explain it more, if it's not already. Okay, so heavenly wars, this is where heavenly wars tend to occur the most between fourth density beings. Now, they exist separately on separate frequencies, they're totally different energies, but they do tend to war quite greatly because they are somewhat physical. They're bipedal energy bodies, and as the service to self beings do love to come in and conquer lower density civilizations, this tends to generate wars between both sides of the fence, I guess you say, the positive and negatives. Of course, as you go higher, you have fifth density. This is the density of wisdom. They tend to stay out of the war themselves. They'll tend to have lower beings do the work for them, things like that, or they'll use their energy to influence things like that. But they exist as energy light bodies. They're not physical at all. As I said, they're completely in time space. Of course, they can, if they wish, manifest a body and come into fourth or third densities, but it's very, very rare. Of course, many do incarnate in third density, and they do so under the free will choice that they have to lose their memory, incarnate with no memory in the veil of confusion and forgetting and all that. As I've explained before in previous episodes. Now, sixth density, pure light body, and it's the density of unity, of love and light, and where the service to self path ends, and because they're unifying, so groups of fifth density entities are unifying and becoming what's called an oversoul or higher self. So they're becoming a being of oneness, a unified collective. This is what our higher self, oversoul, is, and therefore once those beings on the service to self left-hand path will move on, they will ascend. In doing so, there's only one way through, and that is to switch polarities and unify, because there's no longer the path of separation. The only way forward is unity, and so therefore it apparently, according to the law of one, it makes them much greater beings of the service to other path, the true path, because they've seen so many incarnations along this path of how not to do things. They've learnt greatly. So the greatest teacher we have is our mistakes. We learn better from our mistakes. I know I repeat that a lot, but it's true. It's really why this negative path is so necessary. As bad as it sounds, and bad as it really is for us while we're here experiencing it, I know. However, there is much to be learnt from it, and without it, there isn't that learning. So it's there, it exists, as nasty as it is, it's there, and it needs to be a path of exploration, because without it, apparently Ra says there has been planets or octaves and logos which have tried a straight one path of oneness, and it is extremely slow apparently. So there's no veil of forgetting or any of that, and it is absolutely slow, and so these cycles, these things just continue on and on and on. Not much happens in the third density without the choice, without the possibility of negativity. So it's not enough being learned, not enough happening, all that. So it makes sense once you comprehend all that. As bad as you thinking of it is, you need to look at it from these higher perspectives of these higher dimensions. Try and comprehend it from that level. And that's why I do these videos. I want to help try and convey these higher planes of existence. Try and get people thinking from these higher dimensions. Try and think from their perspective, which is also us. It is us on a different level, on a different dimension. So just keep that in mind. And then we move into seventh density, seventh dimension, which is pure light. No longer a body, just existing as light. Pure light, with everything. So it's all moved into one. And yeah, that's the whole octave, and it begins again with a new logo, sub-logo, or logoi I should say. Awareness of prior experiences, significators, matrices, potentiators. These are all things that help with the process, things that could be done better and things like that. So it's just a part of God learning how to be a better God. So yeah, the Logos creates new archetypes and new levels of experience based on all these teachings contained within that octave, and starts a new octave. Sorry that took so long. That was a massive recap there. I really didn't expect to waffle on that long. Now let's crack on. So let's talk about the collective consciousness of the Earth, since that'll give us an easy point of reference to understand this deep concept of the evolutionary process. The Logos, which exists in 8th density or dimension, begins a new experience through consciousness or soul group. Should make a lot of sense right now after explaining all that. So in this case, the Earth, or Gaia, began its evolutionary process in consciousness from the first density billions of years ago, being rocks, minerals, lava, and so forth. As the Earth was forming and once ready, entered the second density of plants and animals. During this time, many beings visited the Earth, even some moving here during the period in which it became 3D activated. This is commonly believed to be the Anunnaki, as well as others. Obviously, dinosaurs inhabited the Earth and at the time, and apes began evolving. It's believed the Anunnaki may have wiped out majority of or some beings may have had a hand in wiping out the dinosaurs. It's not really clear. We don't know for sure. And there's many possibilities. So beings from elsewhere and evolved beings apparently moved to the inner Earth due to cataclysms that occurred, because the Earth goes through cycles, and that'll be covered in next episode. The Earth was ready to have its own 3D consciousness evolve, so it needed fractals of itself to incarnate and experience the third density, and the confederations of planets worked with the Earth to make the conditions possible. Now, the overall cycle for 3D is approximately 77,000 years. This is broken down into 25,000 year cycles, which can coincide with the 25,920 year precession of the equinox. And that can be found in many parables, allegories, folk tales, myths, even architecture throughout the world. and a study by scientists Giorgio di Santillana and Hertha von Deschend called Hamlet's Meal explains this greatly, and is a good read. As I said, I'll cover the cycles, yugas, ages, eons in my next episode, so don't worry if this isn't making a great deal of sense right now. Now, in order for a consciousness to go through third, it requires a choice in polarity, being positive or negative, quite often referred to as good and evil or duality. This means a consciousness going through the 3D process of evolution must be exposed to both positive and negative to make its own free will choice to move towards one of these polarities. Now, I'm repeating a lot of stuff, but it needs to be said to make sense, okay? This also requires that entities and beings of high dimensions, both positive or negative, can interact and incarnate within this new 3D Earth Gaia consciousness. Or with it, I should say. These entities must obey the universal law of free will, therefore can only bring in as much positivity or negative as the Earth's consciousness allows. So, for example, if the consciousness fights with itself, is selfish, dominates its other selves, then by its own free will, it's allowing more of the same negative energy to come through via other entities. And the opposite, of course, is in effect. So a Bible reference that I believe to be an allegory for this, so we can understand the beginning of this great cycle, is Adam and Eve presented with the fruit that will enable them to experience the process of becoming gods, but must know the duality of positive or good and negative or evil in order to do so. So hence the eating of the apple. Upon making this, so this is kind of the choice that the Earth made in order to become a human. So I believe this is my interpretation of it. So when they chose, yes, I'd like to do that, bit the apple and was cast out. Upon making this choice, they had to leave the heavenly realm of or what's known as Eden in the Bible, and live on Earth. Now, this also fits the purpose of 3D incarnation, where each individual portion of the Earth consciousness is to make the choice to move towards either positive or negative polarity, thus making the choice for the collective consciousness of the Earth or Gaia. So it's obvious not all entities play fair by these universal laws such as free will, especially the negatives of the lower densities being third and fourth. But those that don't follow these laws, they do suffer the effects of karma and loss of polarity. So this is why you get fourth or fifth density entities who get lower density beings to do their dirty work that can often involve free will infringement. Most likely this explains why we often hear from insiders that short greys are actually programmed life forms that operate in a hive mind capacity, doing the bidding of these higher evolved beings. A scary concept, no doubt, but I wouldn't stress too much about it when you really think about what we are overall. Now, this is why there's a confederation of higher density beings that watch over us and or watch over the new consciousness that is going through this process. Thus, try to maintain a balance and according to free will wishes the Earth, be they conscious or not. So there's only so much they can do. So we must ask, we must do the positive things, we must do the service to self things regardless, because we are leading by example. We are creating more of that ripple in energy and creating more of it by our actions and thoughts and energy. Now, these being, and we're allowing more of it to come in, so other entities are allowed to come in, positive entities, as we do more positive things and we do ask for their help and things like that. Alright, these beings or entities that come in from the higher dimensions can enter in their native form, as I said, or more often disguised. They can also incarnate in the bodies of Earth and try to influence one way or the other, but as I've said before, are subject to the same veil of forgetting and confusion as the rest of us. So these entities are often called wanderers, starseeds, or brothers and sisters of sorrow, who are here trying to help the Earth consciousness, and as they've gone through this process already. So they know how hard it is when there's such negativity influencing things, especially from the get-go with us. So what is the outcome and objective for these influences? Well, for the positive beings, they gain further polarity, which helps their oversoul and higher self to evolve, but do run the risk of being caught up in the karmic cycle of the Earth consciousness. If they do create a karmic ripple, they must stay and continue to aid from some level, potentially part of themselves, part of themselves is karmically tied, therefore they must continue to have part of their consciousness in either the inner realms or incarnated, things like that. Okay, until that karmic ripple is resolved, or the consciousness has actually evolved to that next level of fourth density. Now for the negative, they can choose to incarnate and try to switch polarity, or help to alter the consciousness to evolve towards or ascend to the negative left-hand path. All depends on their intention, what they want out of it for themselves. So how does the Earth consciousness ascend? This, as I stated earlier, is often called harvest, rapture, or ascension, depending which belief system you ascribe to. They have slight differences, but they're essentially describing the same thing, and I'm going to cover that in a few episodes. But quite simply, as a collective majority, it must choose to move into the positive or negative fourth density, which is the next experience, and this is done by each individual making that choice themselves. And whatever the majority chooses, the Earth will move into that vibrational frequency. Already spoke in previous episodes about how that 95% more service to self, or 51% or more service to other or all thoughts, actions, and so on, are how this actually works. Obviously, with all the interaction from outside its own consciousness, this complicates the process, and in Earth's case, can really suppress and slow it down. Of course, and I'll go off on another tangent here. Ra mentions how they were a very positive, loving, even polyamorous existence in third density, civilization in third density, I should say. So they were very unified already. They explored love for one another in a much different way, and didn't have control mechanisms quite like we do here. And so they pretty much ascended at the end of the 75,000 year cycle, all of them, whereas it seems not many of us will in this. However, we'll be greater for it, so don't get too worried and upset about it. Okay, now back to what I was saying. So yeah, remember, interaction with others is how we really learn most, and how we learn greatly from making mistakes as opposed to getting it right first time every time. This is why we go through the process of forgetting in each incarnation, also called the veil of confusion. Because if we incarnated with full memory of past lives and what soul group we belong to, there'd be no learning and no mistakes. Like playing a game of cards and knowing everyone's cards. Another great example is if in a previous life you're murdered or a rapist, a murderer or a rapist, or you were murdered yourself, or raped yourself, this would heavily negatively impact the next life, and most likely inhibit the possibility of progress or potential for positive change. Now, for negative entities, they've chosen a path of separation, therefore they only recognise themselves as gods and not the law of one concept of oneness that I've explained throughout this whole YouTube channel, I should say, of episodes. Because of this, they just do not understand that all the negative they project upon others is actually upon themselves. So this is how karma is actually generated. Sorry if I'm talking quite fast, but this video is getting a little long. I waffled on quite a lot to start with, so I just want to smash through it. Please re-watch it if I'm going too fast for you. Now here is where I'd like to explain my perspective on the Gnostic concepts, as they do tie into the law of one's explanation of our reality, but is somewhat distorted. So in the Gnostic philosophy, the 3D realm is actually created by a false god known as the demiurge and controlled by its archons, which are lower level beings. So if we look at the law of one, and we see that Yahweh was a positive entity to start with and made genetic modifications to human beings, or sorry, I should say to the evolving primates, to create what is now today modern humans or Homo sapiens. But it also mentions how the identity of Yahweh was hijacked by a negative group called the Orion Empire. So there's potentially we see in the genetic record that there are these different beings, different levels of evolution within. So it looks like there is indeed been genetic experiments going on with the evolving primates, different ones even, by different groups. Some being the Anunnaki, some being the Yahweh group. So I just wanted to clarify that. Now the Gnostics knew that something was wrong with Yahweh at this stage, and since the Jews were adamant that Yahweh was indeed the creator of the universe, the Gnostics ran with that and then jumped to the conclusion that the creator must indeed be evil and negative, and that the physical universe was a prison for our spirits. Now I feel had the ancient Gnostics known that what had really gone on, they probably wouldn't have developed this negative demiurge idea. So it just seems to be a bit of distortion and confusion. However, I do love the Gnostic philosophy, and I do think it has many great teachings. But some of those aspects are just somewhat distorted, just like any religion. So we have to look at the bigger picture, take bits in from everywhere and see what seems to be the most likely for us. Right. So if in the law of one, it also states that the Earth is heavily controlled by negative entities in our lower realms by a group, as I mentioned, called the Orion Empire. Now, to find out more about this empire, we need to dig deep into ancient history, esoteric teachings, mythology, and folklore to find out more, because it's throughout all of it. Yeah. It does come across more as archetypes and negative archetypes, things to be aware of. Tales that parents used to tell their children about, like witches or beings in caves. Negative creatures in caves and things like that. They all stem from somewhere, and I think they have some truth to them, much more than we give credit to them. These aren't just mythology, folklore, or fairy tale. So since the earliest recorded history, such as the Sumerians, Egyptians, Mayans, Aztecs, Native Americans, and so forth, we have the serpent or reptilian archetypes showing up quite often as gods, such as the Anunnaki kings of Sumer, the Viracocha of ancient Mexico, Naga of ancient Japan and India, the Shetty Snake Brothers of the underground that the Native American Hopi tribe speak of, the Sea Crops, the Serpent King of Athens, the Jinn of the Middle East, the Chitori of Africa, and many more. They're just some of the main ones. And of course there's others in other, as I said, not always is it a reptilian. Sometimes it's being replaced in like fairy tale stories, it's been replaced with another being that isn't as scary, such as witches. So yeah, most are said to live underground, and not often seen above ground, but in the earliest dynasties of some of the empires, it's said that these reptilian humans actually worshipped as kings, pharaohs and gods, so they ruled over humanity or their creation. And these beings were appeased with sacrifices, precious metals, and most predominantly gold. Now, not all represented as being inherently negative, but the majority do seem to display those characteristics, because they are dominating and controlling. So that's the main aspect of a negative being. It's also commonly believed that the Orion Empire is made up of many conquered species from planets, the majority of which do reside in the Orion constellation, hence the name. But some are outside of it, and this doesn't mean that each and every being from that constellation is indeed negative, just as here we have both positive and negative human beings, but obviously those who are in control of us are no doubt of the negative polarity. But here's where I'll kind of stop, and I'll continue this part of my research on a new YouTube channel that is more conspiratorial and ufological based research. So I'll keep this channel based more in metaphysical, spiritual science. But yeah, so to find out more about my reptilian and negative entity research, among many other topics like free energy suppression, UFO ET disclosure, the secret space programs, and more, tune into my new channel, which I'll announce the name of in the next episode. These negative entities, to wrap it up, I'll just finish it off about these negative entities, give you some closure on it. The negative entities are essentially part of the fundamental process of this evolution, and the Earth's consciousness must incarnate in this realm where negative and positive exist, to make a free will choice to move towards one or the other. And that means you are part of this process, and each and every action that you make contributes to this whole. So never underestimate the power of doing something for another person or doing a selfish act. One or the other, it does have a massive ripple effect. So think about your actions and act accordingly. Act from the heart. As the Law of One mentions, the Earth consciousness is seen as one being from the native sixth density, which is where Ra is of, and it appears to be schizophrenic. So the reason being is because it's constantly at war with itself. Obviously, we are being influenced to take part in war against ourselves. And the Orion Empire often tricks it's said in the Law of One, this Orion Empire tricks a 3D evolving consciousness prior to its evolution to 4D. So that's another concept I will dig deeper on my new channel. So it seems we may have an elaborate set of coincidences and many co-conspirators going back 6,000 or more years, or more logical, we do indeed truly have a spiritual process of evolution beyond our current 3D level of perception and comprehension. But you decide for yourself. I'm just throwing it out there. So Here's a great quote. Just ignore the he part, as we know God is all that was, is, and ever will be, and is not a he or a she. So I hope you enjoyed digging deeper into the concept of densities and dimensions, also the concept of harvest, rapture and ascension, which I'll cover also in its own episode on this channel in a few episodes' time. And as I've said already, the next episode is the cycles of time and consciousness. So I'll be continuing to build upon these concepts that I've talked about now and in previous episodes. So sorry it's gone for so long, but thanks for watching. Hope you loved it. If you have any questions about it, please comment below. Hit like, subscribe, share and so forth. Love and light. Namaste.